All right, let's talk Las Vegas Raiders. This is a team, a lot of news around the Raiders right now, especially as we get closer to the trade line, and we got some exciting developments. One of the things you look for is changes in how teams are approaching certain players. Players that weren't on the block are now available. Some guys that were available now are off the block. Interesting time right now. And the Raiders recently made some news that I think is an indication of a major trade. We'll get into that report in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick. That is Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, this is the time of the year as we get closer to trade deadline where the sources of reporting really matters, especially when it involves a team like the Raiders who have been tied to a bunch of different trade rumors. And this is why we always look for great reporting from two guys in particular over at ESPN. They got a lot of talking heads, a lot of shouty show guys, but they still have some great boots on the ground reporting. The two guys we're talking about, Dan Graziano and Jeremy Fowler. Fowler specifically today, one of the best in the business. When he says something, you pay attention. And without further ado, let's pull up the report from Jeremy Fowler. Then we'll talk about what it means on the other side. The report says teams I've spoken to believe the Raiders are open to trading wide receiver Jakobi Meyers, but are not actively trying to move him. The sense is the Raiders would prefer to play out the season before making major determinations about the roster, but Meyers requested a trade in the preseason, so a potential deal feels at least on the table. All right, so this is, again, a major shift. Earlier, and let's go ahead and pull up the second report, Miles, if you don't mind. This is from the preseason. Las Vegas Raiders starting wide receiver Jakobi Meyers, who is entering the final year of his contract, has requested a trade, a source told ESPN. The Raiders and Meyers have been unable to come to terms on a new deal. Las Vegas, however, has no plans to move on from Meyers, according to a source. So this is a shift. This is a change. They went from, listen, we're not going to move on from you, Jakobi. You're staying here. Not going to happen. To now it's like, we'll field the call. We'll hear you out. And this is how trades accelerate. And I used to not take a whole lot of stock into this kind of thing, these shifting dynamics, and say, maybe that's just noise. And then the Micah Parsons deal between Green Bay and Dallas this offseason, right after a preseason during training camp, really caught my attention. It really alerted me, and I think a lot of other people as well, to how fast things can change. For months, it was, Dallas is going to sign with Micah. It's just Jerry versus Micah. It's going to be a lot of noise. And then suddenly one day it was like, whoa, the Cowboys are giving Micah permission to talk to another team. And the next day he was traded, right? So the moment that status changes, right, you have a status quo for months. The moment it shifts even a little, that's a sign things are shifting massively behind the scenes. And I think that's what this is. Again, this is good reporting. Jeremy Fowler, I take it for what it's worth. He's one of the best in the business. So the Raiders have gone from no dice, not trading Jakobi Meyers, to, we'll hear you out. We'll consider it. And while it doesn't feel like a grandmaster shift, it's not like they're putting him actively on the trade block. It is a pretty seismic movement from where they were earlier in the offseason, where they were like, listen, we're not going to trade Jakobi Meyers at all. Not going to happen. Now they're like, we'll hear your call. And I think they're going to get some interesting calls. We talked about the Pittsburgh Steelers being one team that probably will be interested. There's a lot of, I think Rashid Shaheed from the New Orleans Saints probably fits the Steelers the best. But the Saints, again, they may want to hold on to their guy. If that's the case, the Steelers definitely call when it comes to Jakobi Meyers to be a third down target. We linked Meyers to the Steelers in our last Raiders video, saying that's a very viable option. But there's a lot of teams looking for help right now, wide receiver. The New York Giants, because of their injuries and because they like how their young quarterback's playing, they've been linked to trading for a wide receiver. They want to give their young quarterback enough weapons to really grow and develop. Jakobi Meyers could be available for them, right? There's other teams as well that suddenly have emerged as potential target guys. A team like the Buccaneers that have had some injuries at wide receiver, they're a top flight contender. They may want to go get a veteran guy to kind of stem the tide as they look to get a little healthier, right? There's a lot of options that have just showed up on the table for the Buccaneers because of Jakobi Meyers being, again, who he is as a player, his resume, his experience, his pedigree, and the fact that the Raiders starting to shift their attitude a little bit. I think a trade is working behind the scenes. I think something is getting close. Now, I don't think it's like nailed down, but I think things are happening very quickly. Like the Micah Parsons Cowboys-Packers thing. For months and months, it was, we're not going to trade Micah, not going to trade Micah. And then one day it was like, we'll hear you out. We'll hear a phone call. And the very next day he was traded, right? It happens that fast. And we're seeing the same thing here with Jakobi Meyers. For weeks, for months, not going to trade Jakobi Meyers. He wants a trade. He wants out. We're not going to trade him. Not going to happen. Then suddenly one day, we'll hear you out. We'll take a phone call. And then the next day, big trade. Now, I don't know if it'll happen tomorrow. I don't know if it'll happen the next day. But I think at this point, it's fair to say that massive moves are being conducted, at least preliminary behind the scenes. And I think they're going to move pretty quickly because there's a lot of these contenders that in short order are going to realize the market's going to dry up. If you're the Steelers looking for a wide receiver and you're all in on Jakobi Meyers and someone like the Giants snags him up first, you're in for a world of hurt. Right now, you're really desperate. This is a situation where these contenders want to be the first mover, want to go out and get their guy. And I think there's going to be a lot of calls being made, especially with this reporting going on towards the Raiders in terms of acquiring Jakobi Meyers. And I think the Raiders are in a good position. Again, Jakobi Meyers probably walks this season. I don't think the Raiders are going to extend him anyway. A compensatory pick, best case scenario, is the last pick in the third round, which is basically a fourth round pick. I think they could flip him for probably at least a second to a desperate team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, maybe a third and a fifth, which would be, again, a lot more than what would amount to basically the first pick in the fourth round. Best case scenario is a compensatory pick. I think the Raiders are in a great position, and this new reporting, I think, is an indication that things are happening very quickly behind the scenes. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this, but first, let's hear from the sponsor of today's video. We would like to give a big thanks to DraftKings Sportsbook for sponsoring this video. Look, we're in the thick of the football season right now. NFL is in full swing. It's an exciting time to be alive. Trust me, I know we all feel that. But we got other sports right around the corner. The NBA is going to tip off shortly, and that's why we're excited today to talk about what DraftKings Sportsbook is specifically doing. Right now, if you bet $5 and your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets. And even if your bet doesn't win, guys, here's a really awesome deal. You get 3 months NBA League Pass on DraftKings Sportsbook. You talk about a deal. Again, if you bet $5, new customers now, you get $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. But even if it doesn't, you get 3 months of NBA League Pass. You talk about value, and that's if you use our promo code SMI. 3 little letters, hard to forget. There's also a link in the description box below. DraftKings Sportsbook, right? They're a great company. They are the preeminent force in the industry. If you're looking for a place to get involved with the action, you got to go to DraftKings Sportsbook. And that's why we're excited to work with them. We only like to work with the best on the channel. We only like to work with the smartest on the channel. And that's why we like, once again, DraftKings Sportsbook. Make sure you check them out today. All right, Miles, let me throw it over to you now. What are your thoughts on everything with the Raiders and all potential trades, and specifically this Jakobi Meyers opportunity?
Yeah, Nick, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff when you start to look into the Jakobi Meyers situation. I think a lot of it has to do with two things in particular. The first one being there's a lot of suitors out there. There's a lot of teams that are looking to do good things that have injuries to the wide receiver position. You named a lot of them. One that comes to mind for me is we talked about the Los Angeles Rams. Puka Nacua gets injured. He's banged up. We know this is a team. Matt Stafford, how long is he going to be playing? There's already rumors earlier this offseason before everything happened that maybe he doesn't even come back for this season. So they really want to win now. So Jakobi Meyers to the Rams, that's a team that really is looking to go all the way. So amongst all the other teams, Steelers, everybody else that you mentioned, I think that's another team to keep your eye on for a possible Jakobi Meyers link with the Rams. But the other thing I think that is behind the scenes, in between the lines, crisscross, backwards, forwards, whatever you want to say, as far as why the Raiders are doing this, I think it's the emergence of some young guys on this team that now, the beginning of the season, the Raiders are like, well, Jakobi Meyers, he's one of our top receivers. He's our top wide receiver. Brock Bowers was the top receiving option last year. We can't let him go. We don't have anyone else that can slot in this early on. We got to figure something out. But now Trey Tucker is emerging. We're seeing him become really well. Dante Thornton Jr. is doing really, really good so far this year. 5 catches, 94 yards. Looking really great as a big-time playmaker. Jack Beck is a guy that's coming onto the scene as a wide receiver for this Raiders team. So they're seeing, hey, we've got options. Let's maybe reconsider all of this and say, maybe Jakobi Meyers is a guy, if we can't come to get a deal done, something like that, the contract, we're too far apart, maybe trading is the best option. Maybe, like you said, we can go out and get some real value out of one of our stronger players, because we can see that we don't necessarily need to lean on him anymore. There's other players in this offense. Obviously, Brock Bowers is a stud. They're using Michael Mayer a lot more this year at the tight end, at receiving. Trey Tucker's looking great. Like I said, Thornton, Beck, Genty looks really good. They can lean on the running game a little bit more, maybe have him, stick to the stance that he likes, and we're going to see a lot more action out of Genty. So I think there's a lot of good stuff working in Las Vegas as far as the team kind of situating himself to be in a situation. But I think Jakobi Meyers, all of this, culminating, progressing, things like that, I think that he's on his way out. I think the Raiders, like you said, there's something going on, because you don't go from staunchly saying, we're not going to trade him, he's staying here, to now all of a sudden having a reporter come out and say, well, maybe there's potentially, we're hearing offers. There could be, deals on the table. We're willing to hear what people have to say. That means something's going on. Something is shifted, and the Raiders are feeling like they don't need to hang on Jacoby Myers anymore. They'd be better off saying, hey, we're not going to get the deal done. He's going to walk anyway at the end of the season, like you said. Let's at least get what we can for him right now. I think this is a great decision by the Raiders.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple things to point out here. I think the fact that you brought up the Rams is interesting. Obviously, there's a little bit of connection with the Devontae Adams trade, although that, of course, was a whole different dynamic altogether. But the young players, and especially Ashton Jeanty, and we did a film review on this channel breaking down Ashton Jeanty. Go check it out if you haven't seen it earlier this week, talking about how his development in the run game is opening up the rest of the offense and how the Raiders offense can be pretty simple. It can be run the football, play action boot, run the football, play action center of the pocket. And we know Brock Bowers is beat up, but when healthy, he's a really good player. Obviously, Trey Tucker does some good things as well. They got some young playmakers. You mentioned Thornton and Besh. So it's one of those things. If you're going to be a running football team and you have a tight end as your number one playmaker, Bowers, and you have Trey Tucker as a capable wide receiver and a couple other younger guys around them, what do you need Jacoby Myers for? It's a great question, right? Because there's what I call a one ball problem, emerging, where there's only one football, right? It's like an NBA basketball. If you've got 5 scorers on your team on the court right now, you're going to have some problems. But if you have one scorer, one rebounder, one point guard, one 3-and-D guy, one just, off the ball kind of shooter, then you've got enough guys that can kind of fill out a team and be efficient and effective. The Raiders right now with Jacoby Myers, I'm not saying he's the odd man out, but if you want to develop Jack Besh, if you want to develop Dante Thornton, then he kind of becomes the odd man out because then you're choosing one over the other. I think Trey Tucker being your number one wide receiver, develop Thornton and Besh inside, Thornton as your big play outside, makes sense. Run the football with Ashton Jeanty and run it a lot with Ashton Jeanty. Play action boot and get Brock Bowers as your weapon next all-pro superstar tight end playmaker. And that's an offense, guys. It doesn't need to be complicated. That can work perfectly fine for the Raiders, and we talked about in the film review. And I think that's why the deal for Jacoby Myers is starting to make sense from the Raiders' perspective. They can look around and say, listen, we can run the football and play action boot our way to 24 points. If we can develop Thornton and Besh, then we become a really good offense. We don't need Jacoby Myers. If we can flip him for some assets to help out our O-line and our defense, maybe add some depth in some key positions, that would be a coup, a massive victory for the Raiders. And that's what I think why we're seeing a change in attitude. The Raiders are starting to realize that their team dynamic is changing, I think, in a positive direction, led by the emergence of Ashton Jeanty. And I think it sets this Raiders team up for a lot of success if, and I think likely when, they pull off this trade.